I'm not sure which ascended master, incarnated in human form, said this, but I find it to be rather strikingly true, obvious, and not obvious at the same time, unless you've lived it. And that is one of the greatest sources of suffering is the refusal to let go. Said a different way, is the ability to move through life circumstances, challenges, trials, and tribulations and not get stuck is imperative for actually harnessing the power of your creator abilities. And where I have gotten stuck in the past is when I have held on to a false belief or an old manifestation or an empty vector, meaning a one-sided manifestation where I was inserting people in who were never going to show up because in this lifetime, their destiny was going in a different direction. I have an episode called Empty Vectors if you're curious about that in my reality shifting series playlist. But what happens is that we often don't know that we're doing this until retrospectively we are able to look backwards and see. For example, I remember graduating in graduate school and trying to find a job. And I had plans to move into industry away from academic teaching and getting a postdoc after my PhD. And what I found is that I couldn't find a job. And this is not when the job market was taking a nosedive. It was almost as though the universe had a stop button on every application I sent. I didn't even get callbacks. It was really weird. It was actually strange. I think I got one interview, and that was somebody who had headhunted me for something that I didn't apply for. And I went through the interview process and I realized it wasn't a good fit. Mutually so. But every position, and I applied to the full range, reach positions like below my experience level and at my experience level. And with my background and everything that I had, it was so unusual. I wouldn't be the only one, though, that would experience this. There was another starseed person, friend of mine, who was undergoing a similar transformational period. And they had a different set of circumstances, different background. And it was like they too, in a job market that was supposedly thriving, could not get a job. And theirs lasted a long time, almost as though whatever process they were using was somehow being intervened upon in a behind the scenes manner, because it was just ludicrous. It was ludicrous and absurd. And also they were extremely qualified and also applying for reach positions below their position and at their experience level. And they really had a hard time with this transition. It really weighed heavily on them, and they had a lot of anger that started brewing towards the failed academic system of churning out college graduates and racking up student loans and debt. And then at the end of it, a lot of their college graduates not being able to find actual jobs. And even though they had been out of college for a while and they had a series of jobs that was unrelated to the degree that they went into, they felt that the crushing experience of trying to find a job with their academic background really was ill prepared. So as a result, their anger grew and grew and grew and grew. And they started blaming the system, which needs an overhaul. There's no criticism there. They started blaming the people that encouraged them to continue with their academic career, even though those people had never gone to college. So they didn't understand really what they were recommending. And they still bought into this illusion of the American dream. So on and so forth. I, at that time, didn't put a lot of stock into what was happening to me because mostly my life was falling apart anyway. It actually was. And I was in between states and transitions and relationships and a spiritual awakening and burgeoning consciousness. And it was intense. And this other person was also going through that. But whereas I fully embraced that lifestyle and went into that, one of the last conversations that I had with them in person was that they needed to go a different way and they needed to be more grounded. And I took that as this implicit understanding that I was going too far for them to continue engaging in some of the discussions that we were really deeply enjoying. I thought it was mutual, but for them, it ended up being too far. Just really, really off the wall experiences that I wanted to talk about. And they recycled back into the normal professional workforce. And I'm not sure what has really transpired with their career, but I'm sure it's amazing because they're so capable and talented. But the way that they got their next job was actually kind of through a workaround and kind of like a friend of a friend in person. Can you make an introduction? Instead of the other routes of blind applying and going through the systems and the processes and recruiters and things of that nature. They're different paths. And I just took my savings and invested it in myself and my consciousness and my meditation. And I started traveling the world. I gave up my possessions and I leaned into the experience. And now, many years later, I sit here and I see that time in my life very differently. I'm grateful that I didn't find that job because all of those jobs were not in alignment with me anyway. And actually, they would have been soul crushing at some level because I was waking up to a different way of being and operating in the world and to fit myself into those environments that I was applying for, some of which were at very conservative companies, would have, I believe, put a stop to where I have ended up shifting. And it is actually a source of suffering when we hold on to those goals and those achievements that are egoic and paper-based. When we want to do something for the wrong reasons, we get bent out of shape when we can't make it happen nonetheless. And when we actually do that personal examination, what we realize is alignment is really critical to not only the fruition of our manifestations, but also to our happiness, to our enjoyment at a very basic level and also a spiritual level. Being in a life that you've created and manifested that is also successful and joyful and all of the amazing attributes, it's like next level living. Whereas when we're only prioritizing basic income, basic needs, success, prestige, and we're like, well, it's good enough. This is a good company. This is, it's going to make my career. It's going to do this. Yes, that provides some element of temporal joy, which is ultimately fleeting in the long run, versus when we really step into the meaningful and deeply connected existence. What we find is we no longer tolerate fitting ourselves into places that we don't belong in. And as a result, we're actually a lot happier. We really are. And even if all of our lists and all of our goals haven't yet been accomplished, there's this sense of relaxing. And I don't mean slacking off. I mean, you actually just relax into the manifestation because you feel like it's coming. Even if I don't know the when and even if I don't know the how, I've got such a great foundation that when those pieces fall into place, it's going to feel all the more complete, but I don't feel incomplete right now. And looking back, then, if I had stayed in that mindset of why is nobody calling me back? What's going on? Who do I get angry at? And at that time, I was also experiencing hacking. So, my whole internet was taken over and messages weren't getting to me. So there was part of me that was angry. That was like, who's intercepting my emails and who's, and it could be that nobody was, right? In truth, those positions were not in alignment with me, but it also could be that there was a divine intervention on my behalf that was making sure that I had no opportunities in those directions and crushing them before they even had a whimper of a manifestation coming true. And either way, the best outcome was actually achieved. And by understanding this tendency, and I share my story so openly because I know that somebody's going to resonate with this, because we can lose years, if not decades, if not our entire life, to resentment and bitterness and feelings of failure and succumb to these negative emotional states because we believe that something's supposed to work out exactly the way that we envision or want it to. And all of us who follow any spiritual awakening teachers and consciousness teachers will hear throughout so many different people's perspectives that we have to let go and we have to let God, or we don't try to control, we don't chase, we attract, we so on and so forth. There are many different ways that this is iteratively taught about in almost every circle. And yet we still get hung up, especially when we're early on in the awakening journey, when we perceive what we believe is failure, when actually it could actually be the best thing that's happening for us. But when we hold on to like a hamster wheel, the hamster is just running. And then we boot up these emotional experiences to justify why we should be upset. And we create this negative reality where we hold our head down low when we might be at the cusp of a breakthrough that will change the rest of our existence for the better if we were to just lean into it. But it is often the mind that wants to categorize failure and success and where we're supposed to be, where we think we're supposed to be, even though literally all of the options could actually be the worst thing for you and keep you playing small and keep you stuck and keep you around the wrong people. Let's say you want to manifest the love of your life and you take a job that takes you on the opposite side of the world, or with an opposite schedule or deep underground, so you never really see the light of day, and you reduce the probability of bumping into whoever that love of your life is. And I don't believe that there's just one, but oftentimes people do. You reduce that probability so it's infinitesimally small and practically impossible and unachievable. And everybody has free will, so there are things that have to be calculated on the back end. Yeah, they could go to Bora Bora on a random vacation when you happen to be there too, if everything's working properly and if they make all of the right decisions which lead them there. But there's so many room and opportunities for their free will to send them in a different direction. That's why we have to play with the probabilities. It's not magic. It's actually a series of probabilities, and getting people to line up in space and time to have those meetings it's actually quite complex. And so let's say that you're in my position, in my story for a moment, and you're angry and you start wearing that anger inside of you and that bitterness inside of you to where it affects your disposition, it affects your everything. And it could be the best thing for you to be sure that you're shifting in a different direction, to not have any replies to your resumes, any replies to your emails. Because in doing so, it shifts you out of a life that, in my case, was dying. One of the best things you can do is to let a life and a chapter gracefully pass. The more we hang on to what wants to die and what wants to exhaust itself, the more we actually keep trying to revive it and engage it and shake it back alive. And you can never leave me. You have to always what? Like on the scale of eternity, it just doesn't make sense to do that. But we in our human form, there's something about our innate psychology which keeps us tied to our fantasies, even when our fantasies don't want to become reality and are actively trying to hit the exit button or trying to pass into a different dimension. And you're still showing up, knocking at the door, wondering why nobody's answering, and then building a story in your mind that is a rejection story or an abandonment story or whatever your core wound is, if you still have core wounds. Not everybody does who's listening. So when we are able to move through challenges and tribulations in our lives, it allows us to facilitate the best possible timeline, because it allows us to recognize that we might not have all of the answers, and we don't have to. In fact, sometimes the best journeys are the surprise journeys where we don't see it coming. And when it really starts to develop, it's such a delight because it's not overwrought and overplanned and micromanaged with all of the things on our wish list or our manifestation list. And it's none of that. We actually facilitate the readiness to receive the best possible outcome. And that is how we move through gracefully to the other side.